That's a good commitment. I'll share our opening prayer just over study to sort of incline our thoughts and hearts. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of life in the universe, author of Scripture, who commands us to engage with texts of meaning. This morning, we're going to look at chapter 25 in Genesis. The stories of Genesis are essentially a story of family relationships. So whether it's Adam and Eve, and then the sons of Cain and Abel, and then whether it's Noah and his family, and we get then to Abraham and his sons. We've spoken of Ishmael, his firstborn, to the concubine of the slave Hagar and his son Isaac, and then we move on from there and we get introduced to Isaac's sons by Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau, and we continue and then we follow the lines of Jacob. What happens at each of these moments is that particularly when there are two siblings, usually it's sons, that we read about how they are in opposition to each other, or there's a contrast that's established between one or the other. And then invariably, particularly as we move into the next generation from Abraham, we follow one line and the other is either all but forgotten or drops off the page, so that the story of Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, sort of it's mentioned. We're going to see him again here, but shows up very little beyond this, and yet becomes the story that defines the Muslim tradition, the Islamic tradition. Ishmael is that line, and through Ishmael, and that back through Abraham, or in Islamic tradition, Ibrahim is the line there, such that all the disputes in the Middle East around Israel in terms of being properties, which are land claims, are inheritance arguments. Yes?
Is this also known as the begats?
Yeah, sure. It's the begats. Right. In particular, when we get a long list of those who were begotten. Is that the passive? Yes. What I want to point out are two things about these tensions that are created when we have two children, two sons, two siblings. We've mentioned before, but it's worth highlighting, that the biblical trope is that the second-born has a quality or something about him, typically, such that he supplants his older brother. That seems to be the constant or repetitive motif, and we see that. Then that brother who was the firstborn or was supplanted sort of all but drops off the page. And so it's as if you're following a family tree and you're not going through primogeniture, the firstborn, but more to the secondborn. And then in the rabbinic tradition, which I'm going to highlight some for us today, which is to say the rabbis of the Talmudic period, which was essentially 1st and 2nd century, so contemporaneous with the life of Jesus and the disciples and the earliest of the Gospels. In Jewish time framing, that's considered the rabbinic period, that 1st and 2nd century, in which the majority of the oral traditions that had been passed along get written down and get codified. The rabbinic tradition is working on a more homiletical plane than is the text itself, the Torah text. We can talk about what the Torah text arrives to do or what it provides, but the rabbinic understanding is these texts need to be meaningful in some way, something that will allow them to continue to be relevant. And homiletically, in terms of writing the sermon or the persuasive argument, we're going to find that the rabbis have an interest in bringing back these firstborn sons into the narrative in order to teach something that either needs to be avoided or something that can be highlighted. And so we're going to see that Isaac and Ishmael and later sons born to Abraham after Sarah passes away and he takes a second wife, that these sons come together in the rabbinic imagination. Does that make sense? The rabbinic imagination being, essentially I've described it once as fan fiction. What was the conversation that isn't on the page? Or what motivated this particular protagonist to do these things? Or what else can we read into a word that might otherwise be casually overlooked or just moved past, but might give us some meaningful insight such that we can glean something in our own lives, so that we see ourselves reflected in these stories. All right? I want to mention, Jonathon and I were talking as we were exchanging ideas about what we want to highlight this morning. This particular chapter, chapter 25, otherwise undistinguished except for the material within it, if you will, is the only chapter, I believe, that includes each of these three generations. It speaks of Abraham at the end of his life. We get introduced to Isaac, and before the chapter is done, Isaac and Rebekah have twins, Jacob and Esau. All right? And so we have all three, and in Jewish parlance, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is that an idiom that shows up in Christian tradition too?
And who knows where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob show up in Episcopal Church? In the Eucharistic prayer, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Rachel, we usually add that. It's connecting us with the patriarchs, the matriarchs, that this comes from that long tradition. So that's a very normal thing for us to say.
Excellent. Great. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is the referent just this past week in the Jewish liturgical calendar, or the lectionary, if you will. We come upon the story of Moses at the burning bush, right? Somewhere in the suburbs of modern-day Cairo, perhaps, right? Comes upon, in this patch of desert, comes upon this bush that's burning but not being consumed, and out of the bush comes God's voice, and God says, I made myself known to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by this name. To you I make myself known by a different name. And so the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob becomes the referent for that which is the formative generations, or the farthest back generations of the Jewish people. All right? Right. So let's jump in. And look, you want to take us through the beginning? Do that?
Yeah, let's read it.
We'll read it.
Notice how matter-of-fact this is. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran. I should have asked Aaron to read this with all these names. Do you know these better than I do?
I don't.
Okay. I'll speak
We'll
with
just
authority.
stipulate that, you know.
All these sons, all these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastwards towards the east country. This is the length of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, east of the Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his sons, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. These are the descendants of Ishmael, and it lists all of them. There are 12. Skipping to verse 19. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if this is to be this way, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, the 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so that he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished. Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That was relatively short, particularly if you skip the names. There is a lot of stuff in there. Notice how the story of Abraham began, kind of like ended how it began with a list of genealogy. Why is that important? To have a list of, here are all the sons of Abraham, an extended family of Abraham. Why report all that stuff?
Because you see how it all started.
To see how it all started, God fulfilled the promise. Remember, he would be a multitude of nations, lots of children and descendants. Well, here's a list of all those descendants now that Abraham's gone. And then we pick up the story of Isaac and then Jacob and all the way through. So God keeps that divine promise. Notice that Abraham lived 75 years after the birth of Isaac. It was very, as I said, matter of fact. And then Abraham took another wife, Keturah. That was 38 years, or he lived 38 years after Sarah died. So this wasn't he's mourning and this other woman like slides in and comforts him and takes all his stuff. There's some period of time there. It doesn't say that he loved her deeply, that she was so talented and wonderful and pretty. It just kind of describes that this thing happened without really any commentary. But notice how many sons she bore. Apparently they didn't have time to talk because they're having kids all the time. Sorry, that was, I'm too blunt sometimes. Abraham, verse 5, did the kids of Keturah get the inheritance? Because remember, Abraham's got a lot of camels, silver, gold, stuff. Where did all the money go? To Isaac. Notice here, even though he married Keturah, how does it then refer to her? As a wife or as a concubine? So he didn't, I shouldn't say that on camera. He gave all of his stuff to the son Isaac. What did Ishmael get?
A gift.
A gift. Thank you so much. I got a gift. It doesn't say what the gift is anywhere.
No.
A gold ring, gold watch, a car, down payment on a house, nothing like that. Isaac gets everything. All the children of the concubines, sorry, you got to go make it on your own. And not only that, you need to go away from here. Here's some money, go away. Verse 6, he gave concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac, east country, far away, go away. Why in the world would he do that? Probably to protect Isaac. It doesn't say, but that I think is a pretty good guess. And all his inheritance. Because where does the line continue? God's promise. Through all these concubine kids? Nope. Through Isaac. So Isaac needs to have as much protection as possible. Because the last thing you'd want, I mean, look at the entire history of any royal house. England's a good one. They all want to wipe out the heir so they get, I'm the 58th. If I got to wipe out 57 people to get to the throne, I'm going to do it. So Isaac needs to be protected with all the money. Go away, here's some stuff, leave. I think it's a simple thing. What by the way, Aaron, is primogeniture? I think most people know, but just in this context, what is it?
Primogeniture, right, is the inheritance or the birthright that is due to the firstborn, right? At the time it was mailed. In recent years, I know the royal family in England, right, changed that. So if a firstborn is a daughter, she can inherit. But it's why Prince Harry titled his autobiography The Spare, right? Because the joke was we have an heir and we have a spare. In the event that William didn't make it to adulthood before or wasn't alive at the time of his father's death, if he hasn't already sired children, it would go to Harry, because they have a spare. Primogeniture is that it goes to the firstborn, which is the argument between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael over that piece of land in the Middle East today that both believe they were promised or were entitled to. Right? It's oversimplified, but that's where the story originates. So that's where the rivalry and tensions begin.
And that's part of the twist. The obvious one that everybody knows should inherit doesn't inherit. The world's flipped upside down. Also, in a matter-of-fact way, the story says Abraham died at 175 years. What happened 100 years before that? Anybody remember? that's when he was called, leave your country to start his journey. So it's right at around 100 years. Again, 75 years old, you have to start over in a whole new place with nothing, and God's got some promises. I need some guarantees before I just have some vague promise about promised land and like I'm 75 years old. I don't want to go have a whole new family and a whole new life. That's what he did. So there was a 100-year arc of this story, and then he dies. Note who buries Abraham. It's quite significant, it seems to me. Are all the concubine sons there? No. Isaac and Ishmael comes back to bury them. And notice, does it call one as the son of that Egyptian slave whore? Which would be a terrible thing to say. Hagar. What does it call both of them? Is Isaac or Ishmael ranked higher? In that particular spot. They're equal. They're both sons of Abraham. The same honorific title. The sons of the patriarch. Not one's better than the other, which is a really phenomenal thing, is it not?
It is.
One older than the other?
Certainly. Ishmael was the firstborn, but born to the concubine. Yeah, so they're half-brothers, Ishmael and Isaac. The text, interestingly, has them coming back together at this moment. And in the rabbinic tradition, the other sons, we don't know much about the daughters, if anything, right? We can speculate. But the other sons of Keturah also join in. The rabbinic imagination filling in the blanks or trying to argue something about how siblings, when those relationships are strained, can come back together or have common cause, right? This would be used perhaps as a text by, a peacenik in the Middle East who wants to demonstrate that even as far back we put away our differences and we share what responsibilities are ours together, that idea, right? Otherwise, Ishmael drops off the pages, but again, in the Quran, Ishmael is the favored son. Ishmael is the one whom Abraham takes up the mountain to sacrifice. Ishmael is the one whose line that side of the family is concerned with. Right? So we're talking about how these texts get used. Russ?
If you know, I certainly don't, having never read the Quran, but does the Quran include the kind of promise of land, specifically the land we now call Palestine, in the same way that Genesis and the rest of Hebrew Scripture seems?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the question is, does the Quran contain a promise with regard to the land, as the Torah here does, or as the Old Testament does? Does the Quran make similar promises? I'm out of my depth. I suspect so, that there's a claim there, but I don't have chapter and verse to point you to. We should look that up. What claim is provided in the Quran? I suspect it's the case.
I think there's a teaching that Muhammad at one point was in Jerusalem,
Yes.
but I don't know of any teaching that he claimed that whole land at any point in his earthly life.
Right. I don't know.
Here's another, we'll come back in a second, Tom. How do you say that, the name of the cave?
Machpelah.
Machpelah. So they buried Abraham in a cave in Machpelah, which is 19 miles south of Jerusalem in the old city of Hebron. Who was first buried in that cave? Sarah, his wife. So this becomes essentially the family plot, the family cave. So they go there, they buried him. More people were buried there. Who else, Aaron, you remember?
I believe Joseph takes Jacob's bones back there.
Jacob, so it's the patriarchs, the cave, the burial place, the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs. So it is the second most holy site after the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to the Jews. And if you have the burial place of all your founders, the patriarchs and matriarchs, but guess where that is? Machpelah, the cave, now.
The West Bank.
In the West Bank. So if you're an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli, do you want to give up the West Bank where your second holiest site is, where all your founders are buried? Well, of course you wouldn't want to give that up. But if it's also Ibrahim, your ultimate patriarch, if you're a Muslim, if you're a follower of that tradition, Ibrahim, as Aaron said, you also want access to that. Currently, well, there has been for a while, that there is access for different people to go. It was this and then that, and everybody's trying to claim complete ownership. That's some place that should be, in my opinion, preserved with equal access for everybody. But that is something, when you think about these conflicts, of course they don't want to give up all the West Bank, because that's there. That's a historical and greater significance for that. Just it's a simple thing, and I feel dumb because I didn't know this until I was in college. The West Bank of what? The Jordan River. You talk about the West Bank, it's the West Bank of the Jordan River. After Abraham's death, God blessed Isaac. What does that mean in this sense? Isaac becomes the head of the family. Presumably, whatever blessings God is giving to Abraham, then pass on. And what blessings did Abraham receive? Children and land. And by land, you would also include silver, gold, camels, slaves, stuff, money, and children, which would be signs of God's blessing. So Isaac becomes an inheritor of the children and land, and also the head of the family. Tom, you had a question back there.
Yeah, is there any suggestions anywhere of animosity between Ishmael and Isaac?
Yes. So
Would you say that again?
the question was, are there tales or teachings about any animosity that existed between Ishmael and Isaac? And the answer is yes, but we have to read it into the text, right? That is to say, we learn of Sarah's jealousy of Hagar once she provides Abraham with a son. And we can imagine, right, writing the midrash, writing the interpretation, reading between the lines behind the curtain, that a mother's jealousy could easily be transferred to their child, right? Such that
never happens.
Such that we don't play with him, we don't discuss him. That's right. That's how the family, whatever it might be. The language we have about their early lives, Isaac in particular, among the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is really terse. That is to say, we have very little textual information about his background. In fact, there's not much about beyond his circumcision and then another 20 years or so. We don't have what to understand took place between them, right? But we know that there's tension, that Dad had another child.
Who are the two mothers? Sarah is young or old? Old. The first wife. Hagar is young or old? Young, much younger, and Egyptian, so exotic, foreign. Do you think those two women are going to like each other? Probably not.
Right.
And remember that Sarah, who appeared to be jealous, sent her away, and Abraham's like, I can't deal with this, do whatever you want with her. Am I remembering this correctly? I'm the guy, and yeah, I've been, I got several women on the sly and on the side, but whatever you want to do with her, just go ahead and do. So of course they hated each other. It'd be weird if they didn't. Jeff?
It says that Hagar had become kind of arrogant about his position of siring a child. She was the head of the pack, basically.
I'm the head of the pack, the hot new thing, the new wife, whatever.
In my wife's family, there was a great-grandfather who had a second wife, and the first wife died, and he married
Wait a
again.
second.
For the rest of their lives, the family referred to this woman as simply that woman, never by name.
That woman, never by name. One could imagine something similar happening. So, great question, Tom. So, knowing that, oddly, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roy. Where is that? What is that? That should sound familiar to us. The name means the well of God who sees me, or the well of the vision of God. Think back to Genesis 16, we're on 25. When Hagar, the just mentioned Egyptian mistress of Abraham and servant to Sarah, was sent away, Hagar believed God saw her terrible situation and promised to give her many descendants, starting with Ishmael. Oh, and there's a well right here. That's where she was. So oddly, Isaac goes to the place where Hagar had this vision from God. That's some weird psychology stuff mixed in all right there.
Okay. I want to pick up on Tom's question about the tensions between Isaac and Ishmael. The text that we mentioned uses an economy of words, and we don't get a lot of insight about what that rivalry was or what the contrast was. That's left, if you will, to the rabbis who are going to describe it. Similarly, and we have at the bottom of the page, the second part of this chapter, between Jacob and Esau, who are themselves twins, and are described as struggling inside of Rebekah. She's having a difficult pregnancy in this regard. The rabbis teach, for instance, that when Rebekah walked past a house of learning, Jacob kicks her, or is aware of the proximity to this good tradition, and when she walks by a house in which idolatry is practiced, Esau gives her a kick, or is felt, right? He's reacting. So we have a story in the rabbinic imagination from the Talmudic tradition, which even in utero, these two sons are contrasted with each other. They're already displaying their nature, their inclinations, never mind when they emerge into the world, how physically different they are from one another. And the bit we learn about what they prefer. That is to say, at the bottom we have here that the children struggled within her, so she went to the Lord. The Lord told her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. And then, in fact, when they come out, they have these various characteristics and proclivities, such that in verse 27, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was quiet. He resided at home. These then become paradigms or archetypes for those who are drawn to violent behavior, those who are drawn to the physical world, and those who spend their time thinking of esoteric ideas, or are more kindly, or have the qualities that we might look for in a companion, as opposed to someone who is going to act in ways that are driven by passions, that idea. And so that's where the tradition grows up, whereby we have insight into what their relationship, even from the fetal period, I guess is what we should refer to it.
Someone called it an intrauterine conflict, which
That's good.
is very descriptive, and I've never heard that before.
Right?
Clint.
Is there a difference also between Jacob and Esau? That Jacob was a farmer, he stayed in one place, whereas Esau was a hunter, traveling all around. And the difference in 2 human occupations. That's how I would.
Yeah, I think so to a degree. There are different archetypes, if you will, of people. Let me back up just. So verses 12 through 19, it lists the descendants of Ishmael. Does anything strike you about that? Ishmael died at 137, and like Abraham, was gathered to his people, like collected back to that. Did anything strike you about the number of descendants of Ishmael? 12. Like 12 tribes of Israel. There's some parallel that's happening there. Then verse 19 picks up the story of Isaac that introduces the characters in the next part. Isaac, Rebekah, his wife, Jacob, and Esau. This feels very much to me like the opening scene in a movie where you would have these 4 characters introduced, and then here's the conflict that will define the rest of the story right at the very beginning. Here's the 2 main characters, in this case Jacob and Esau. This is a man's man. He likes to hunt. And Isaac loved Esau. Oh yeah, he's tough. And then here's Isaac. He's a man who's quiet, likes to study, stay in the tent. This is a mama's boy, if I've ever heard that. You have these 2, obviously, characterizations to a degree, or archetypes in another sense. Here they are, and there's conflict from before they're born, for God's sakes, that will follow them their entire lives. And then this story goes. There's conflict and promise, or God's blessing, might be another way to say promise. The promise made to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, but why not Esau? So there's that promise and conflict there. Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah, which is kind of old to be a father or just getting married. And she was barren, Rebekah was. Who else was barren? Sarah, her mother-in-law, or deceased mother-in-law. That's a strange thing. Why does that come back again? According to the rabbis.
Yeah, so barrenness becomes a motif, a repetition as well. Or, if you will, let's expand it a little bit, sort of a miracle birth. Someone who's of advanced years, someone who heretofore has been barren.
Or a virgin.
Or a virgin is a miracle birth, right? Sort of inexplicable. Certainly you wouldn't expect it. It defies what is sort of taken for granted about how the order of the world takes place. But, drawing from the Gospels, nothing's impossible with God is the idea.
Ooh.
How about that?
Very impressed.
Yeah?
Just New Testament quotes there.
I'm a quick study.
So in the womb, the twins battle the sign of things to come. It's often called an oracle, the little quotes there given by God. That's not prescriptive, but descriptive. They're going to battle it out. Note that God did not cause the struggle. And my favorite part is right next here. The firstborn son, Esau, how did he come out? Red and hairy. Obviously Irish. Oh, come on. Yeah, with a bottle of liquor in his hand too, sure. No. Why? That sounds funny to us. One of my mentors, David, is British, and Esau was an airy man. That's how he always used to say it. And I never really got the significance. Why red and why hairy? Big deal. It wasn't because he was Irish. What is the Hebrew word for red or ruddy?
Adom.
Adom. It's a play on the word Edom, which means red stuff or red skin. Esau becomes the father of what people? The people of Edom, the Redskins, the Edomites, all saying the same thing. So is that a slur? Or is that just descriptive? I'm not clear about that.
So I think it's descriptive, but it's come to take on a slur kind of quality, right? That is it's a physical characteristic. We mentioned, or Jonathan invited us to think about the West Bank being the western, west of the Jordan River. If you've ever been in Israel and looked across the Jordan River, you'll see on the westernmost border of what's Jordan, the mountains of Edom. And they look red the way the Blue Ridge Parkway or the Blue Ridge Mountains look blue. Yes? And so that was the land of Edom. That was the red area, such as it is. And it's to there that Esau is, it's with that Esau is associated. And Cain, Esau, Ishmael are all going to become reference for those persons basically with whom we either have nothing to do, or those persons who are our antagonists or our rivals or are threatening to us, right? As these families split off in these ways. And Abraham, who's referred to as the Ivri is the Hebrew, Ivrit is the Hebrew language. There's the root in that word called avar, where we get Hebrew, avar, and it means over or on the other side of. And so Abraham becomes a metaphor, as it were, for one who bridges these two peoples, or who's crossed over from, maybe it's over from idolatry to monolatry or monotheism, or it goes back and forth. And so those who live over there, those who live in Cleveland, we don't mean anything by that, no offense, right? But that idea, or there used to be various jokes about people from various countries or what have you, because that became a means of denigrating someone. So it's not originally a slur, but it comes to take on those meanings.
And why would somebody here make fun of Cleveland, or somebody from Cleveland make fun of Pittsburgh? Because they're really similar in a whole lot of ways. And they're about the same size, and they're both former industry places, and our football teams play each other. Because they're a competitor and a rival, if we trounced them every game, there's no reason to make fun of them or say they're awful, dumb, ugly people. Edom becomes one of those bad guys that you want to make fun of.
Right.
And so if calling them the red people wasn't bad enough, do you remember the Hebrew word for hairy? It's not something I would expect you to know.
Well,
Sayar
is hair, yeah.
is hair. Seir is the region where the Edomites lived. So again, it's a play. The hairy red people that live over there. That's what Esau represents. Anybody know, this would be a huge bonus credit, what the people from Edom, the Edomites, are called in the New Testament? It's more the Greek Roman name for it or Latin name for it. When you hear on Pentecost the Idumeans, I-D-U-M-E-A-N, Idumeans, that's the Edomites, same group of people. I didn't know that until last week.
Jeffrey? Yeah.
Say that again. Were the Edomites the first to do baptism? I believe that various groups did some form of baptism for a very long time. Do you know about that? I don't know that. Jeffrey?
There are two things. I think some archaeologists think that the site of Jesus' baptism is very near that cave where Jacob is buried.
Did you all hear that? Some archaeologists think the site of Jesus' baptism by John in the River Jordan was near the site of the cave of the patriarchs.
Let's agree that in this small, compact piece of land, everything's nearby, yes? But more than that, these traditions overlay on top of one another. So what is to have taken place in Jewish tradition on what's today the top of the Temple Mount, or just behind the Western Wall on that, right, where the Dome of the Rock now sits, which is, I believe, the third holiest site in Islam. In Jewish tradition, that's where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. That's Mount Moriah, as it were. It also shows up in Christian tradition, where the crucifixion took place, and it's along those stages that we move from there. And who mentioned that there's a tradition where Muhammad comes to Jerusalem? It's there that he ascended to heaven. In this same place, right? And whether that's true or not becomes really immaterial if that's the story that you grew up with and that's how you understand it. So it's very likely that the site of the baptism would be proximate to the burial site.
Yes, somebody have a question over here?
I was just going to make an extraneous point. All babies are born red and a little bit hairy.
All babies are born.
And Jacob didn't. He was later, so he wasn't in the nest. Whatever.
All right, so the comment is that all babies are born red and hairy.
But I wanted to ask about matriarch. Rebecca loved Jacob, and
Isaac loved Esau.
Leah?
yeah, and Sarah loved, well, she accepted Ishmael, but she loved her own son. So is this where we get matriarch sort of thing, that a child in Jewish tradition is Jewish and born to a Jewish mother?
No, I don't think so. My understanding, the question was, in Jewish tradition you may be familiar that if your mother is Jewish, traditionally that makes you Jewish. The conventional thought about where that originates is that we always know who the mother of a child is, particularly on the day of one's birth, right? And if, as was imagined, rape was used as an act of war, or you might be impregnated by someone from that over there, if you go through the patriarchy, if it's a patriarchal line, which it had been for a long time, well, then we've got a problem. If, however, you're born to a Jewish mother, then the Jewish community will understand you to be Jewish. right? In the Reform Jewish tradition, now in 1973, so what's that, just over 50 years ago, the Reform movement, Reform Jewish movement, recognizing or being built upon a foundation of gender equality, identified that demographically there were now essentially as many children born to a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother as there were children born to a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father. And so the Reformed Jewish movement, it sort of cleaved the Jewish community when this took place. The Reformed Jewish community determined that if you're born to either a Jewish mother or a Jewish father, they go on to add, and are raised to understand yourself to be Jewish, a little bit higher threshold than just being born with a pedigree or a bloodline. But if you're born to a Jewish mother or a Jewish father, the Reformed Jewish community will recognize you as Jewish.
What about Orthodoxy?
Orthodoxy doesn't. And that was the Orthodoxy only recognizes it through the mother.
Okay, I know a case of that, a Christian mother and a Jewish father. Kids were raised Jewish.
The kids were raised Jewish, so in the Reform, a child born to a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother raised Jewish would in the Reformed Jewish community be recognized as Jewish. I also know stories like that, and then I know stories wherein the child born to the non-Jewish mother, Jewish father, raised in the Jewish community, had a bar mitzvah, whatever it may be, then goes to marry a more traditional Jewish partner, yes, and her family or his family, the more traditional family, has an expectation that in spite of your being raised Jewish and your understanding yourself to be Jewish for all of your life, we want you to go through an actual conversion such that it will be recognized by other streams of Judaism. Okay.
Is that called really Jewish?
Right, that's essentially,
Really?
yeah, essentially.
Yeah. We
You're
do
not Jewish.
something similar called confirmation. If you're one thing, you're received or confirmed about how much, what's the threshold to make you identify as our group. So Esau, the firstborn, red, hairy, obviously a play on, that's the bad guy in the story. That's what's telling us, look, he came out with horns when he was born. And then the secondborn, also a son, was named Jacob. What does the name Jacob mean? Various things depending on who you ask. Jeffrey?
Heel sneak.
Heel? Supplanter? If you name your kid Jacob, don't tell him your name means supplanter. That would be unhelpful. It could mean God protects or follows.
So the idea is that your Ekev is your heel. Yaakov, which is the Hebrew for Jacob, suggests that when they were born, Jacob is following Esau but is holding on to his heel as he comes through the birth canal. That's the idea, right? It's sort of in his name is the idea that you followed, or you were the second born.
So Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born, about 20 years after he and Rebekah married. And then where notice the story skips their entire childhood, all the fights between the two of them, all the wonderful birthday parties, and it just describes them, Esau and Jacob. Esau, as we mentioned earlier, is a skillful hunter, a man of the field, an outdoorsman. Jacob was a quiet man who stayed indoors. And this next couple lines you could write, and I'm sure many, many volumes have been written. Isaac, Dad, loved Esau. Why? Because he was fond of game. He was a hunter. He was a man's man. Rebekah loved Jacob because it doesn't say. He stayed at home with her.
Well, let's go, if I can.
Yeah,
Let's go
please.
back. Remember, Jacob marries two sisters. Remember the story? Jacob works for his uncle Laban. He intends to work for 7 years and marry Rebekah, which is the woman with whom he's fallen in love. But just before the wedding, as it were, his father-in-law, soon-to-be father-in-law, substitutes the older sister Leah, and that's whom Jacob marries. He then works another 7 years and marries the other sister, right? In Leviticus, we're going to learn that there's a prohibition about marrying a sister of one to whom you've already been married in that first wife's lifetime. In much the same way as we're going to hear in Leviticus, certain rules about dietary restrictions, about which Abraham, when he receives the three visitors who tell him of he and Sarah about Isaac's birth, right? He serves them meat and dairy, which is later going to be proscribed. Yes? So Isaac marries Leah and Rebekah. You can imagine the tension in that household. You've got to write the story the way the rabbis do about what goes on in that family household with regard to that dynamic and why it might not be so surprising that one parent favors one child and one the other, particularly if there's domestic tension between the adults. Yes, that would be reading into the story, but it wouldn't be so very far-fetched, particularly if you were writing the story not to tell us what definitively took place, as if we've done some genealogical research or we've gone through the letters they exchanged, the way David McCullough does with the Adamses, right? We learn about their relationship, but rather we want to tell a story about what happens in a family when a child is favored over his sibling or her sibling. What happens in a marriage when affection or emotional relation between the partners are displaced and passed on to the children, which is what makes these stories so continually relevant and current, because these dynamics, human relations, are constant and are ongoing, and it's not so unusual when we find patterns between generations or across generations. It's called epigenetics, when there's something within your family story that gets replayed again. Sometimes that's a trauma. Sometimes that's relationships. If you've ever done a genogram, people know about genograms? Essentially, it's a family tree, but that includes information within it about what took place, such as divorces or such as deaths of children or what have you, that will shape the narrative in future generations, such that, it's not so surprising necessarily that you've had these experiences in your lives, given that you come from a family that also had these various patterns. And so these get played out again and again, not just barrenness and not just the second son supplanting the first, but all of these kinds of dynamics, such that, in Rebekah's case, she has two children inside who are struggling, or two nations are going to emerge. Potent foreshadowing for the rivalries and dynamics. Allison.
This could be another lesson, but when does Muhammad fit into Ishmael's line? Is it ever recorded?
The question is, when does Muhammad fit into Ishmael's line? And I don't know that genealogy. I don't know either way if Muhammad traces his lineage back through Ishmael. I suspect so, but I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, not in the Bible as we know it.
Right.
Get to the last part. So skips their entire childhood. One loves the son, the other loves the other son. Esau been out in the fields. Jacob's inside making stew, red lentil stew. Esau was famished. Oh my God, I've been out working all day. I'm so tired I could eat a horse. And Jacob says, oh, sure, brother, have some good hospitality. I've made some lentil stew. What does he say? Sell me your birthright. Oh my God, don't tell mom what just happened. I get to play with your toys for 1 week. I get to use your phone. I get to use your computer. You could imagine a sibling negotiation going on, that this is not the first time they've done this, as happens in any family. When you have something, one has it over the other, information that you're going to get in trouble or something you want, the other one uses that to his or her advantage there. I would be very interested in the Midrash. Did the rabbis ever say, was the mother involved in any scheming before to plan this stew, because you know he was going to come in hungry, and just wait for your opportunity that you can steal that birthright from him, and he's too dumb and impulsive and he'll fall for it?
So the answer is yes.
I thought so.
The trade, or the negotiation between Jacob and Esau, such that Jacob acquires from his brother his birthright, is the first stage in getting the birthright. The other is actually receiving the birthright. That is to say, duping Isaac into giving to Jacob, duping Isaac to give to Jacob the birthright. And there's a story in the next in the next chapter where Isaac essentially dresses up as Esau, right? Puts animal skins or attaches hair to his arms and stands in front of the fire and gets the smoke smell, so he's being outdoorsy. Or he smells like game because he's been in the slaughter shed or whatever it is, in order to acquire those characteristics that Isaac, who by this time in the story is blind, will mistake for Esau, to whom he owes rightly the birthright. But Jacob, with Rebekah's complicity, makes this happen. Or she prepares the food that Jacob is going to bring to his father Isaac at the time when the birthright, right? Jacob we know, or rather Isaac we know, loves the taste of game. And so with Rebekah's help, they perpetrate this fraud against Isaac. Yes?
Well, kind of in addition to that, that's in chapter 27. But what is interesting, I think, in this particular case, that when they're stealing the blessing, Isaac is actually not given the covenantal blessing, because that one is reserved for Jacob later on. So he thinks in Jacob, and he's just giving him wealth and power. And if you keep reading in chapter 32, 33, Jacob is actually returning that blessing back to Esau when they met after his struggles with God. I mean, just really
Very
fascinating. But so Rachel, I think, is mistaken when she makes a mistake, because she thinks that's the important blessing that Isaac is going to give to Esau. But in fact, he's not given the important one. The Abrahamic blessing is going to be given to Jacob when he leaves to go to see his uncle Abraham. So I think
Fascinating. Right? The upshot of what now is suggesting is that there's more than one blessing. They're qualitatively different, and various characters misunderstand what's the most important blessing, or what blessing will actually secure your future in this way. It happens again in Egypt later when Joseph, in blessing his children, crosses his hands or does it in a way that's a bit confusing. Which leads us back to, if you look at the top of the back page, I think that's where it was. Where Isaac blesses. Where is it? Or Abraham blesses Isaac over the other sons. The midrash or the sermon would be, what in point of fact is it for a parent to give a blessing to a child? It may be the largest share of the inheritance. Okay. It may also be, are you familiar with ethical wills? What you want to bequeath to your children, what you want to leave for them, that has nothing to do with material or financial matters, but what you want them to know about who you are or what qualities you see in them. That may be the larger of the gifts, or the more important, even as obviously we need financial and physical resources to survive in the world. But to know your parent loves you in a way, or sees you, right? We have that idiom now, I feel seen, right? What is that blessing? What would you want to leave your children over and above? Or even if you have no financial or material means to pass on, what would you bless them with? What would be the blessing you would have hoped to receive from a parent or a guardian or an earlier generation? Just food for thought, right? Again, we don't want to oversimplify or reduce this down to one item, but what does it mean to receive a blessing from your parents? What does it mean to feel blessed? Hashtag blessed. What is it to be grateful? As opposed to the word I used the other day from Teddy Roosevelt, that comparison is the thief of joy. What is it to know a sense of blessing or contentment? Tom?
Just a couple of points. First, there doesn't seem to be any love in this family. Esau comes in to his brother, and he says, I'm starving, I'm about to die. Can you give me some of that food? Well, and his brother offers him some food. He says, no, you got to give me something, deal with it.
Yeah. You say there's not a lot of love and affection in these families. Pretty much that's the case most of the time.
And the second point is, what does Jacob do with this blessing? I mean, after all, he goes off and works for 14 years in fields, in order to win his wife. What has he actually
done with that blessing? How is it actually benefiting him? Is there any indication of that?
Here's a good question. Jacob, by the way, is a stand-in for the people of Israel. How great is it to be the chosen people, Aaron?
Sometimes
get
we
that
wish
blessing.
they'd choose some others for a while, you know?
Yeah, I mean that not in a, well, kind of joking way. Is it really a great thing to get the blessing at all? I have to go.
Yeah, I'll join you.
People.
Anyway, Susan, go ahead.
Elise.
Elise.
Way too big a question for a quick answer, but I've been wondering a lot, to what extent current day Israelis and Palestinians see the conflict in terms of biblical promises, or is it other stuff that they understand?
Well, the question was, does the present-day conflict between Israel and its neighbors, the Palestinians, what have you, claim that land, does it go back to this, or is it more than that? At its origins, it's a property dispute. It's an argument over inheritance. But of course, centuries of acrimony and war and resentment and anger and grief have all been overlaid on top of that. I don't want to be reductionist, but it's sort of like the Hatfields and McCoys. Does anyone know what that was really about? Doesn't matter anymore. These are the people we were taught to hate, or these were the people we were taught to fear. Right? Yes, it goes back to something that went wrong early. Right? I remember looking at, this is more than 20 years, looking at a congregation to consider joining as the rabbi, and I spoke to some older colleagues and asked me, tell me what you know about this congregation. They said, something went wrong there 40 years ago, and it's still getting played out. They're still working those issues through, right? And that happens all the time. All the time. Okay, thank you very much. Good to be with you. See you in a week or sooner.